This segment is brought to you by JigMasters Jigs. When in doubt, get the jig out. Go to JigMasters.com and use promo code PNF20 and save 20% off your next jig order today.
Welcome back to Bass Fishing for Noobs on the Paddle and Fin podcast. I'm your host, Ryan, and today we got a cool guest. We got Mr. Aaron Stiger here. Welcome to the podcast, buddy.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on again.
Yeah. This is your first time on Bass Fishing for Noobs, but you have been on the podcast before.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Yep, been on this, not on this segment, but yeah, absolutely. Been on with Brian and the guys once before, so definitely good to support y'all.
Yeah. All right. Tell us a little bit about this whole Eric Jackson stepping down thing.
Yeah, man. So EJ's been obviously, he started the company 15 years ago, and it's no secret he's
real quick, like for people that may not know Eric Jackson, this is the president of Jackson Kayaks. Like, just wanted to throw that out there real quick. Sorry.
Yeah. No, EJ started the company 15 years ago just to kind of get him and his family into solid whitewater kayaks. He's a multiple-time world champion along with his kids. They're all extremely talented. And lately EJ's been, he picked up FLW fishing a few years back. He's found some success through that, and he wants to pursue that more fully. He wants to spend time with his grandkids. He wants to spend time with his kids. And so, from a business standpoint, being a president of a company takes up a lot of time. And so he's still going to be an ambassador of the company. He's just not going to be an active day-to-day, on the business end of it at this time in the same capacity. Now, would I imagine he's still going to be super involved moving forward in a lot of other ways? I'd have to say so, if I had to speculate. But right now it sounds like it's just one of those things where EJ wants to have some more time. And you know what? I completely respect that. And good thing is that it outside of the title, there's a lot of things in place at Jackson Kayak to where we're going to be just as strong moving forward as we were yesterday. So it's an all around good thing. I'm happy for EJ. He kind of reached out to the team earlier today about it, and everybody's feeling the same exact way. We're all kind of, bummed to lose our fearless leader and title, but you know what? He made it very clear, like he's still going to be completely around, and so good for him, and we're excited for him.
Yeah, that's cool, and there ain't nothing wrong with him, deciding to take time for himself and live life a little bit. I think all of us have that dream to do that eventually.
Oh yeah, and he's been so successful with the company, and he's been a role model to all of our team, and I know a lot of people just around the kayaking world in general, on both the whitewater side, the rec side, the fishing side, and so he's not going anywhere. It's he just needs a little bit of breathing room, so it's all good for him.
All right. Well, appreciate you touching on that. That was kind of a last minute ad right there. It was just announced, so I had to bring that up. But now to get to what I brought you on here for. You the other day you were doing a live video on Facebook. You were out fishing and you were talking about cold water using a jerkbait.
Yeah.
Now a jerkbait is something I've never caught a fish on, but I don't know what it is. I love working a jerkbait. Something about that action. I love it. So I want to get better with jerkbait in general, but fishing it in cold water with everybody seeming to have pretty cold water here lately. I figured this would be a good subject to talk about, and I'm really excited about this one here. So, where should we start with this? Should we start with the rod or?
I think you started off. I think you started off just why now, and why would you fish a jerkbait right now? Because this is really One of the only times I personally fish a jerkbait throughout the year. And so I kind of break it down as active versus inactive fish. And so at this time of year, here where I'm at in Ohio anyway, the fish are not active. Like the smallmouth, the largemouth, they're not as active, I should say, as they were just a month ago. A month ago, we're late October, through November, and that water's cooling down from, 65, 60, 55, 50. And that's like prime time when those fish are starting to school up, chasing around the schooling shad, the schooling bait fish. And they're really feeding up for the wintertime. And they're super active, and they're quite honestly pretty easy to catch at that point. And when things start to slow down, as far as the seasonal changes and as far as, weather and water conditions, as far as the time of day, the lunar patterns, like things just all kind of move in tandem. And those are things you have to consider. And that's why fish are either active or inactive. When you start talking about the seasons, winter in Ohio is associated with water conditions, and that is cold water conditions. And a fish's metabolism, it just goes straight down. It goes from super feeding mode to like almost inactivity in just about a month's time, because now the water, it was frozen only, a week or two ago. We had a big freeze, and everything froze up for a few days. And so the water's just above freezing here. So we're probably talking like 38 to 40 degrees where I was fishing at. And those fish aren't super active. So that means you've got to do something to make them bite. Now, at this time of the year, you can do one of two things. And there's two different theories, I feel like. When you see an inactive fish, how do you make it bite? And either you make them react, you trigger them, or you finesse them out, right? So last week I took a Ned rig out, and I just sat there with my rod, just sat there and jigged it. Pretty much just right on the bottom, didn't even move. Found a high percentage area where the fish, I knew they were going to be in a deeper hole, and they were, and relative to the water that I was on. And I just jigged a Ned rig and caught, 3 or 4 smallmouth. Just right off the bat. That was actually on a live video as well. So that was a completely different technique. So that was a finesse technique. But this is the other side of that. Now, a jerk bait is one of those baits that it triggers a core vicious predatory response in a bass. The reason it does that is because it mimics quite perfectly the forage that they're going after in that specific season, or they had just got done going after in that specific season, that fall to winter transitional time. What makes the jerkbait viable at this time is water clarity. So where I'm at, I typically don't throw a jerkbait a lot because the water clarity where I fish in this specific body of water is not very good. And a jerkbait is one of those baits where it's got drawing power, and it can draw fish in clearer water, 20 feet away, because it mimics very well a dying shad or a fleeing perch or whatever the forage is. And so that's what makes the jerkbait very powerful. It triggers really just a core response in bass because of the erratic motion and the way you fish it. And so that's kind of why I fish a jerkbait, and just considering, kind of the season and the water conditions. The water conditions, they're cool water conditions, they're clear water conditions. And when those two things line up, that's typically wintertime. That's wintertime in the north. And so you better be good with a jerkbait. Now, we can talk a little bit later. I fish jerkbaits in deeper bodies of water, like that are clear, like a Lake Erie. I fish jerkbaits quite a bit for smallmouth on Lake Erie. And we got some upground reservoirs that I like to fish jerkbaits on as well. So that are more clear as well. So that's kind of the reason behind it anyway. Yeah, so there we go.
All right. So you were saying the water is like just above freezing, and like you're using it right now. What would you say like the range is for water temperature for this cold water jerkbait bite?
Yeah, I'd say probably under 50 degrees. Under 50 degrees, you start transitioning from that fall into more of a wintering pattern. 50, and then it goes down to that mid 40 range, and you're pretty much got fish in the wintering patterns. Because if I look like from winter to spring, I think the same way. Like right when it hits that 50-degree mark, I'll start to speed everything back up. And so going from fall to winter, I use that same kind of 50 and below. I'll start really fishing that jerkbait. And quite honestly, it because the water where I'm at starts to get more clear because the algae just that's in the water starts dying. And so the water clears up. And as soon as that water clears up, you can throw that jerkbait and it'll call fish in. I just feel like jerkbaits have a greater distance that they call fish in because they're natural enough that they attack it versus like a spinnerbait or a crankbait.
All right. Yeah, I think around here in Middle Tennessee, water temps have been like low 50s. As of a week ago, we might be pushing closer to 50, maybe starting to drop under that. Whatnot. That's why I asked that question.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no,
because we're not
you can
quite
throw it anytime. Well, I mean, it's not so. If you've got water that's clear, and fish can kind of see decently well, I'd say you can throw that jerkbait anytime. I mean, quite honestly, and like I said, I mean, I throw jerkbaits right in the middle of the summer on Lake Erie and just hammer fish with them. You know what I mean? Deeper diving ones, but I hammer fish with them on those jerkbaits because it just works. And so if you've got clear water, I would say go for it. Now there are other jerkbaits that have some louder rattles in them. Some of the Lucky Craft series, some of the Pointer series has some nice rattle in it. Those are more of like you can kind of fish those more in even dirtier water though too. So yeah.
Well, that kind of brings me to another question. With cold water jerkbait fishing, what are you? What kind of jerkbait? I know there's like floating, it's suspending, and probably some other ones. What are you using for the cold water jerkbait bite?
So I got into jerkbait fishing about 10 years ago for sawguy. It's kind of like a hybrid between a sauger and a walleye. And there's a lake around us that stocks them. And what I used to do is I'd take Husky Jerk 12s and some 14s. And then I'd take Smithwick Rogues, and those are actually, they call them suspending, but some of them slightly float. So what I would do is I would take them to the lake, like when it was freezing out, and because sawguy bite in the wintertime, and just like these cold water jerkbait bass do. And so I'd take it over to the lake, and I'd literally just put the jerkbait in the water that I was going to fish for 10 minutes to get it the exact temperature of the water of the lake and the consistency of the lake. And I'd watch it. I put a flashlight on the jerkbait, and the jerkbait, a lot of them would just slowly float up. So I'd bring little like thin lead wire with me. Like you can buy this lead wire online. I forget where I got it. I just got a huge spool of it, but I'd bring lead wire with me, and I'd wrap it around the trebles to where that thing would just suspend perfectly in the water column. It would just sit there. And sawguy fishing, where I learned it and I learned the patience to do it, like these would be 5 to 7 minute casts sometimes. Like you'd cast it out and you just pull it down, and you would just let that jerkbait just sit in the water, just 2 feet under the water column, and then eventually a sawguy go by and just hammer it. So ideally, so a Smithwick Rogue is kind of like a cheaper jerkbait. They're like $6 or something like that. They're inexpensive comparatively to some of the other ones. Some of them, like a Mega Bass Vision 110, they typically will suspend on their own. Sometimes, you want a floater. Sometimes you want to bring them down and have them slowly float up. Honestly, you've got to gauge the mood of the fish. So some of them, sometimes you want them to suspend, sometimes you want them to float, sometimes you want them to sink. It really just depends. I typically don't like sinkers because you end up losing them because the treble hook's on the bottom of the bait. If you take too long on your cast, it'll go down and it'll sink and it'll get snagged up into who knows what, and you'll lose your nice jerk bait. But if I'm going to fish, I'm either going to fish with a floater or a suspending one. And if they don't suspend and I want them to suspend, I just add a little bit of lead weight onto the treble hooks to make them suspend if they float. And it works really well by doing that. So, but the key is to get them to suspend, you've got to have perfect balance on it. And it's got to be the temperature of the water. You got to get your jerk bait. Like, you got to take the time to like sit there, cast it out, and just chill on your phone for a few minutes. Let it get the temperature of the water. And then you can use either lead tape, which I think Storm makes some lead tape that sticks on it. And then, or you can use little, wire around the treble hooks like I like to use too. So those are two ways you can make your jerkbait suspend. But I typically do use suspending jerkbaits though. Like, and that's the deal. So I like them anyways. Now there are some that, like, you showed me some Husky jerks from Rapala. I do like shadow wraps too, because they got those flat sides and they do kind of shimmy down slowly. So if I'm fishing like deep on Erie, like a shadow wrap can work because it can get down if you don't want to use something with a huge bill. Those can work pretty decently too if you work them slow. So, those are a little bit like, so I'd say suspending jerkbaits are the kind of the deal. And you can get them from $6 up to, $30 for a mega bass, Vision series. So those are, it's kind of where they're at.
Now, when you're saying you're wrapping wire around it, I'm just trying to make sure I got this right. Are you talking about like the shaft of the treble hook?
Yeah. So the actual,
okay.
Yep. So like the shank of not the shank, but yeah, the shaft of the treble hook. You kind of like, what I do is take like a little loop and I'd put it through like the eyelet of the shank or of the shaft. Mm-hmm. And then I just kind of wrap it and wrap a little, I'd wrap a lot. And then like if it sank, number one, you got to figure out which treble you want to put it on. If it's got 3 trebles, how's your jerkbait sit? Does it sit nose down? Does it sit butt down? Does it sit flat? And I like mine sitting just slightly nose down for some reason. I don't know. I just like it better. So that's where I try to get them. And so then I'll just take a pair of like toenail clippers or fingernail clippers and just clip a little bit of the lead wire off, just a little bit until it just sits there perfectly. And then you've got a perfectly tuned jerkbait. Now, the other thing is, though, is I change out the hooks on every single jerkbait that I have. I don't ever use stock hooks. A lot of times, just treble hooks in general, every crankbait I own, every lipless I own, every jerkbait I own, I change my hooks out. And I forget the exact owner hooks I use. It's I have to look it up, but they're wider gapped hooks, and they work really well. And I tend to not lose as many fish on them. I know I lost a really good one on live the other day, but typically they get them and they pin them down pretty well. And so that's, and you got to find your own hooks that you like. But I just feel like a big consideration if you're going to jerkbait fish or crankbait fish or lipless fish is those hooks. And you're going to pay as much in hooks a lot of times as you're going to pay in the bait. But if you get one pinned, you get one hooked, you want it to stay pinned, and a big part of that is the hooks. So I always upgrade the split rings and then the hooks. So
is there a certain brand that you tend to go
I
after?
use Owner. I wish I would have brought all my stuff down. I got it all up in a box up in the garage, but I got all my hooks and all my split rings and all my jerk baits and stuff. But so I like Owner hooks a lot. They're treble hooks.
Okay.
Now the other hooks that are really good are the Mustad triple grips. I think they're called like KVD triple grips. Those are really good as well. But those are the two I use. So now does that mean they're the best ones? No, I mean, quite honestly, like a lot of these baits nowadays come with some pretty decent hooks. I just like the ones I use they're wide gap, but then they kind of come back in a little bit. And I just feel like there's so much more hook to just get that fish's mouth and keep it there versus like the round bend hooks. Those round bend hooks they'll hook the fish a lot easier because there's no the hook doesn't actually come in, so to speak. So like there's not the little, I don't know, like longhorn type coming in. It's just a straight, it's like a U. So when they swipe at a jerkbait, the fish can really get it and spit it really quick. And if you've got a round hook, they're more likely to get hooked because it's straight up. But if you've got a hook coming in like I like them, it does take a little bit more to get that fish hooked. However, if you've got a round hook, if they get it and you've got them hooked, they're going to get off easier because it's just a straight up. You know what I mean? Versus actually having something there to kind of leverage against them. And so I like hooks that kind of go in just a touch. Is it a little tougher to get them hooked? Yeah, but that's why I use bigger round bend hooks though too. And so like a wider gap hook. And so I don't feel like I suffer any type of hookup ratio disadvantage because of that. And I mean, I was fishing, like, you know, you saw the live video, I was sitting there fishing, and a couple of the fish I caught, like, I felt them T-bone the bait, and they missed it once. But the thing about the jerkbait is like, they want to eat that. They're attacking that thing. Like, it has triggered them. And so, like, I felt them T-bone it, and they didn't get it, and I felt it, but then I just give it one little more pop, and they'd come right back and hammer it. And so, like, you know, I caught a couple fish just like that. And so they want to eat that thing because it's ticked them off. They weren't wanting to eat, but you've made them eat, and they're going to do it. And so, yeah. And so that's jerk baiting. And I do like, to that point, I do like jerk baits that have 3 hooks on them, because you will see, you know, if this is the jerk bait right here, you will see like the fish come up and just hammer it to the side. Like, they will T-bone the bait. And if there's not a hook in the middle, a lot of times they'll miss it. They'll just hit it, miss it, and they never get hooked. And so that middle hook a lot of times is the one that's like, if they T-bone it, they'll get it. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't even think to ask about that. So let's talk about like the setup you use for that, like rod strength, reel speed, all that good stuff.
No, for sure. So if I'm using a like my saw guy setup, I use actually just a spinning rod on braided line, which sounds so weird. But the thing about that braided line is it floats, and I do 5-minute casts. So these jerkbaits are just floating in the water, just randomly floating around, and on a semi-slack line, just on a medium light spinning rod. But that's a different kind of jerkbait fishing. So for bass, I use 14-pound fluorocarbon. I use an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel, Shimano 70XG is what it's called, bait caster. And then I use a St. Croix 6'10" medium moderate Legend Glass Series rod. Now, one thing to consider when you jerkbait fish, it's a semi-slack line technique. And so what that means is, like, do you frog fish at all? Like, do you ever fish a frog?
I've tried it. I haven't really been successful yet. I've got a few strikes, but
yeah. So one of my favorite ways to fish a frog is like almost exactly how I fish a jerkbait. It's just on the top with the frog. So like, I love walking frogs on like open water frog walking, like through like sparse grass, sparse lily pads, stuff like that. So like the way it rolls is, again, like, this is like my gimbal mount, but this is going to serve as everything today. So if you're sitting here and you're working your frog like this, okay? And so what that does, that converts all the way to the very tip of the rod, and you're just doing tiny motions like this. But on a semi-slack line, what that makes the frog do, you're pulling it, it makes it dart one way, it has slack in the line, and then as soon as it hits that other apex, you pull it again, and then it gets slack in the line. Pull it, slack, pull it, slack, and it just goes back and forth, and you're walking the nose of that frog in a cadence. You do the same thing with a jerkbait. It's the same exact thing except for its subsurface. And so what that does, it's the same. I mean, it is the literal same concept. It's why do those bass just go crazy for a topwater frog that's just, or like I do the same thing with like they're called Ricos. They're like little light poppers. It's like a little tiny popper. It's like 2 inches. It's like 1.5 inches or 2 inches long. And I do it on a spinning reel with braid and a loop knot. So I just go, and those things just, and just walk back and forth like on little walks. Same thing with the frog. Same thing with the jerkbait. Jerkbaits though have a bigger, they're subsurface, number one, but they have a bigger side to side. So like probably my favorite jerkbait, I was actually using it in that video. It's the Jackal Re-Range, and it's got a pretty wide erratic movement. Now the Megabass Vision has a very wide movement as well, and I kind of use them seasonally. So like I'll move into the Megabass ones here very soon when the water gets really cold, because they're just so subtle comparatively. But the deal is though, it's a slack line technique, and you're pulling the slack out of the line. You're pulling the slack out, making the bait dart the other way. Pulling the slack out, making the bait dart the other way. And that's why you see, like, if you see KVD, like he's the biggest jerkbait fisherman you'll ever watch. Like, so he'll sit on a dam, like the riprap of a dam, and I've seen him do this just so many times. Like he'll sit there and 20 feet off the dam and just boom, boom, just all day, boom, 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 boom. All he's doing is he's pulling the slack out of that line and then putting slack back into it again. He's just slack, 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 slack. He's making that jerkbait go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then eventually it goes past the fish, and that fish is like, that's mine. You know what I mean? And so that's the deal. But it's the same concept as a top like a spook, same concept as a popper.
That's what I was thinking of whenever you were talking about it.
Yep, that's exactly the same concept. It's the same exact thing. You're just doing it underwater.
Yeah, so it's walking the dog underwater.
That's exactly what it is. Yep, that's the best way you can describe it.
Well, with cold water, how often are you popping it? Are you doing it pretty regularly or slow?
Yeah, so you got to listen to the fish. When I first got on live, I was sitting down, which made me fish it slower, because it's a lot harder to just pop it when you're sitting. So I wasn't popping it as much, and I was getting more bites. And then I stood up and I got 0 bites. And then I went off live, but then I sat back down when I got off live, and then I got more bites again because I slowed back down. And I was like, oh, well, that's the key right there. But then I had to leave because my kids got up from their nap. But if I would have kept fishing, I would have caught more fish. Because I realized that they want it slower. And so you just kind of have to listen. If you're sitting there ripping that thing and you want to be like KVD, you're like, oh yeah, man, I'm going to rip it every half a second. And that thing's just darting back and forth. In the wintertime, that's probably not going to be the ticket. But, if you sit there and you pop it and you keep that slack in the line. Now, a big thing is, and they talk about this on Tactical Bassin, by the way, Tactical Bassin has great jerkbait videos, and that's where I kind of got into bass jerkbait fishing.
Videos all around.
Oh yeah. So I watched their bass one though, and I was like, they said some things that I was like, wow, that's really actually, I never thought about that, because they're saying that if you pop it and you have to, and you don't like watch it, that bait will drift. And when that bait drifts, the fish lose interest in it. And I thought that was very interesting. And so you have to keep contact with it on just enough slack line, but you can't have it be too slack, because then it'll start drifting. And I guess what they found was the bass don't like it as much. So I'm more conscientious about that. See, and it's interesting because in sawguy fishing, you just let the bait drift. It's completely different. And so I've had to like adapt the way I fish for bass versus the way I would fish for a sawguy with a jerkbait. But yeah, so it's a pop, and you keep that thing as still as you can before you pop it again, so it doesn't drift off right, drift off left, or pull forward towards you is kind of what they say. You don't want to pull it towards you either. It's got to be just perfect. So maintaining contact, and to that regard, it goes back to the rod, which we got off tangent, but we were talking about the rod, and I do like, so this is my first year fishing with one of the Legend glass rods that St. Croix makes, and it's been a delight fishing with it. I'll say, because it's for a glass rod. Now, I've fished with one of the KVD Quantum rods before, like those red ones that like Walmart sells them. They're like $100, and they're nice rods, but there's no sensitivity to them. It's just there's no sensitivity at all to them. And I've fished a couple other rods as well that are moderate sticks to try to jerkbait fish. But this one from St. Croix is just, it's sensitive, man. Like, I was fishing and I would hit like a leaf, and I knew it was a leaf immediately, or I'd tick the bottom. I'm like, that's not a bite, that's the bottom. And for a glass rod, I'm very impressed with it. And so I do enjoy that. Now, here's the caveat, though. When you talk about a glass rod, typically you don't really, for jerkbait specific fishing, you don't always want a glass rod, because you want the tip of that rod to be responsive to move that bait on the end of that line. So you're moving it and you're keeping the contact we were just talking about with it. So you're not having the bait drift and missing fish aggressiveness because of that. However, I've had great success with this rod. Like, it goes against everything. Like, before I got this rod, I was using a medium extra fast rod for my jerkbait fishing, as weird as that sounds, because you're like, man, aren't you losing fish because of it? No, I wasn't really, but this other rod works better for it. It as weird as that sounds, and I keep fish. They stay pinned. I mean, like, I just let them just sit there and fight and just pull and comes back up, and it doesn't spring back up because it's a glass moderate rod, and it's the deal, man. That's a good rod. So
it's so. Like just a regular medium rod, should be, because I don't have any glass rods. I ain't dished out the money for that. So
no, I hear you, man.
So without the glass rod, would recommend just a regular medium rod.
Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, you can get away with a medium fast and be just fine. If you could find a moderate rod, I'd say with a tip that's a little more sensitive, you know what I'm saying? Like a rod with a little tip on it, like a little stiff up at the very, very end, so that you're able to, manipulate the bait, so to speak. But it's got kind of a softer overall backbone of the rod. What comes to mind is some of those Bushido rods, that some of these guys fish with, and I've fished with some of them before. They were very soft, and but they did have some sensitivity as well, and so those wouldn't be bad, and those were moderately priced. But honestly, nowadays, now, being completely candid, I do fish for St. Croix, but they just came out with a Mojo Bass glass rod. That is that like $100, $150 range. So like, if you really wanted to like get into this type of fishing, but you didn't want to spend $275 on a rod, like, you could get into it for a moderate amount of money, relatively speaking. But if you weren't able to do any of that, if you wanted to even go down a step farther, like, go get a medium fast rod. Or if you get a medium moderate fast, that'd be even better. And just rock and roll, you'd be just fine. That's the thing. Like, I mean, let's be honest. See, you can catch fish with whatever rod. It's not that big of a deal. It's just, you know what I mean? Like, you can take any rod out. Like, I could take my spinning rod out and catch jerkbait fish, like, because I do with Saw Guy. And then I could take my frogging rod out and catch jerkbait fish as well. It's really not that big of a deal.
Something that, I was sitting here thinking about while we were talking about the setup. You said you're using fluoro line, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
You say 14 pound?
I use 14 pound for my jerkbaits and my crankbaits and my lipless. Yep.
Yeah. So something that I planned on doing this coming up here is with pretty much all my setups is running braid to a fluoro leader.
Nice.
But I'm guessing since you're doing like a walk the dog technique, you're probably not going to want that braid for that setup. Am I thinking right?
Well, I mean, you could, but the reason I wouldn't use braid is because I'm using a jerkbait in clearer water, and so that would take down on the amount of strikes you would theoretically get, in my opinion, anyway.
Even with the leader?
Oh, you're saying with a leader?
Yeah, with fluoro leader.
I mean, I run braid to fluoro on all of my contact baits, like my bottom baits, so like my jigs and all that. And I love that. But I will say for like anything I walk, so I walk my spooks, I walk my poppers, and I walk my frogs with straight braid, just different levels of braid. So like my spooks, I'm walking with so I'm walking my spooks with 10-pound braid, and I'm walking my poppers with 10-pound braid on spinning rods. And then I walk my frogs on 65-pound braid on, my heavy bait caster. But I'm using, loop knots for all those at the end. So it's got a little loop, so it allows the nose of that bait to be free. So it's like a little loop at the end, and then it just allows freedom for that bait to move back and forth. And so that's what I do there. But as far as my jerkbait fishing, I actually just use a Palomar knot. I think part of it's because I want it to be a strong knot because jerkbaits are expensive and I don't want to lose them. I mean, I caught a traffic cone in the river yesterday. I thought I was snagged on the bottom, and I brought up a traffic cone, and kept it, and then threw it away today in the garbage can. But
you didn't keep it?
No, I mean, it's been in there for a long time, dude. Like there was moss on it that was like a half-inch thick over the whole thing. So it must have been in there for a long time. But so I mean, and these are just my setups. The thing is, I guess the biggest thing is like I've gone through a lot of different theories on what I should do for different types of lures. Like I used to just run straight fluoro for literally everything. And then I ran just braid for everything, and then I went fluoro leader to braid for some, or on braid for some stuff, and then I was mono for other things. I've just done a lot of different experimenting. I like fluorocarbon for jerkbaits simply because it doesn't stretch as much as mono does. It doesn't stretch as much as mono does. It's invisible to the fish. I mean, relatively speaking. And it just works well. And the other reason is because I'll use the same rod for my crankbait rod, and I use, what I'm saying? So like it's the same rod for my lipless rod. And so I don't, I'm not sitting here with crazy deep pockets either. So I'm not able to have like 4 crankbait rods on the deck, nor do I use crankbaits enough to warrant that. You know what I mean? That goes back to our point. Like, what works. And the deal is you got to have a rod that is in a family of baits, in my opinion. So mine is, I got one glass rod, and it works great for crankbaits, lipless baits. It works great for jerk baits, and you can work chatterbaits and spinnerbaits on it too if you want. You know what I mean? And that's our St. Croix kind of promotes it as such as well. And so it's kind of like, I got that rod for 6 different baits that I use. Yeah. And so I don't have to carry 8 rods on the deck. Now you could say the same exact thing for a medium, heavy, fast rod. Like you could use with braid to a fluoro leader, you could use that for, all your other baits that are contact baits. And then you basically carry that one spinning rod and you're pretty much set up, so that's kind of where my philosophy on that is anyway.
Yeah. Hey, I'm all about like making different setups more versatile and all that. Because I only carry 4 rods out with me whenever I go. Yeah. So I'm all about. But it was interesting to me. You said you use like spooks and stuff with braid, because everybody I talk to that uses spooks and does like walk the dog technique uses they say use mono because that stretch
sure.
kind of helps with that action.
Yeah.
And
No, for sure.
braid's got no stretch, so
right. But I'm using it on a glass rod, or I'm using it on I'm using it on like a light spinning rod, and so here's my other theory why I do that. So in a kayak, we give up a lot of ground as far as like when we hook a fish, right? The fish has a lot of advantages. Our boats move, our drags move, and that impacts the hookup ratio, in my opinion, on fish. And so anywhere I can get an advantage. So I use very fast reels. So I use like 8.5 to 1 and 8.0 to 1 reels on all my bait casters. And I use like I said, all braid on my stuff. Like my spinning reels are all braid to a fluoro leader. I'm using all braid on my bait casters to a fluoro leader. And then all of my bait casters, like my contact baits, are an extra fast tip, so I can get to the backbone of the rod as fast as I can. It's just, I don't want to give the fish any speed or power advantage if I can't. And so that's one reason I use braid. The other reason is because it floats. And then the other reason is because I feel like I've done mono. I just feel like, again, that slack line technique, and maybe I'm just comfortable with it because I've saw-guy fished that same way. Like, because before I ever did top water baits, it's the same rod I use, top water baits, that I saw-guy fish with. And I'm super comfortable with the way braid feels when I pull that bait. I can feel exactly what that bait does. And I mean, I don't lose fish on it, so I'm good with it, but it's, I guess I just feel like it's, I don't know, man. Like, it feels really correct when I fish it that way because I have full control over that bait. So call it what it is. It might not be right by the book. That's just what I do. So the advice is what you paid for it. Nothing.
Hey, man, you know a lot more about this than I do. Like I said, I've never caught a fish off a jerkbait. But
Jay Randall would say, man, I'm just a hack, bro.
I got another question, and this is just from watching you explain, how you do it and everything. Is when I'm fishing a jerkbait, I'm usually more like doing like, where's my hand? Do it like a side twitch, and you seem to be like going up. Is that how you do it? You like do like upward pops?
It depends how deep the water is, right? So it's interesting. So if you're sitting here fishing like a Stacy 90 from like Lucky Craft, they're kind of like a deeper jerkbait that can get down to like 10 or 11 feet. And I'm fishing. So I'm thinking about like this summer I was fishing on one of the break walls on Lake Erie, and the water was like 9 feet there, right? So I was trying to fish it down, and I wanted to like pull it, fish it down down when I'm doing that.
Like your rod tip going down.
Yeah, the rod tip's going down. But when I was doing that, it was dragging bottom. And so you like have two options, like either A, you slow it way down, which the fish were active, so I didn't want to do that, or B, you can pull it up, and that jerkbait, the bill is still pointing down, but you can point it up and it just kind of stays level to where you want it to be. And that's a big deal, is like you've got to figure out how you're going to work the jerkbait depending on how deep your jerkbait dives and how deep that water is and where those fish are in that water column. And like that's a very big deal. And so there's basically like three types of jerkbaits. There's like shallow ones that go like 0 to 2 feet, or like 0 to 3 feet or whatever. And then there's some medium ones that are like 2 to 7 feet or 3 to 8 feet or whatever. And then there's some deeper ones that are like 8 to 12 feet, And then there's like, I go like do walleye stuff on Lake Erie with ones that go like, they're deep diving husky jerks, and they go like, 22 feet deep. But it's, you gotta determine where your fish are. So like I was using like a Jackal Re-Range 110 on the river the other day, and I think that one goes like It's like 3 to 6 feet or something like that. And I typically fish it down. I mean, I was fishing it down, but I got up on a hump and I started fishing it, pulling it up. So it just depends, you know? And that's the thing is like, if there's no exact way to do this every time. And I think that's like the point I'm trying to get across is like, there's no exact rod. There's no exact like line. There's no exact, you need to do this every time. The only thing you need to know is like cold water, clear water works for a jerkbait. It elicits very, very like active responses in fish. And if you want to have success with it, that's kind of the time and the condition you should go out and do it with. But to go out and say to somebody, yeah, you need to go and get this jerkbait, like, I don't know if that's valid. Now, are some of these jerkbaits probably a little have better action than others? Yeah. Like, I'm not gonna say that they don't. I think they do. I think there are advantages to some of them. However, like, you can still catch fish on any of them. You don't have to change the hooks out. You don't have to make sure they're suspending perfectly. It's just like, I mean, that'd be the equivalent of me saying, well, no, you got to have this top water frog to walk with or else you're not going to catch any fish. Well, that's not true. You know, or you got to have this specific jig because that's the only jig that catches fish. No, that's not true either. Now, are there ways you can increase your percentages by having the right rod for frogging and jigging? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's just the same way, like, how expensive of a kayak do you want to get? You know, it's like, how deep down that wormhole do you want to get? The biggest thing is you got to get comfortable with it. It's just like anything. It's just like any technique. Get comfortable with it, learn the nuances of it, learn how that technique feels to fish. And I think that's a huge deal. How does that technique feel? What does a bite feel like? What does a leaf feel like? What does it feel like when you're working it properly? And quite honestly, like, I just go back to my frog fishing, my spook and my popper and my jerkbait all feel very similar to me. And so they're very familiar and I can just pick it up even though it's a different season and a different technique. It's the same kind of procedure that you're using. You know, it's the same idea as like you're fishing a jig and then a Texas rig. You're doing very similar things.
Now, let me ask you this real quick. When you're doing like the downward jerk, are you standing up?
Yeah. You almost have to.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Unless you're like putting the rod in the water.
Yeah. And you almost have to, but quite honestly, so if you're working a frog or a spook, yeah, you got to be standing up. But with the jerkbait, it's a little different because the bait is below you. It's not level. You know what I'm saying? So like with a frog, the bait's pretty much, if you're sitting down, the bait's like a foot below where your rod is. But the jerkbait's like 4 feet below the boat. So you still have a little bit of leeway. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're actually above that jerkbait. And so you can still just pop the rod a little bit. You don't have to be standing to do that. You can have not a lot of slack in the line and still get that bait to move. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just, because you're like, so when I'm going like this, the tip of that rod typically is not going like this. It's not like,
I was going to ask you,
it's
like,
going, the tip of the rod's going like this. It's going like
2 inches
like
or so.
Oh yeah. It's like this, right? It's very, very subtle, especially like, and the way I learned that was with walking a frog on the top of the water. You literally, and where I learned to walk a frog on top of the water, I was actually fishing with Kyle Weisenberger. He's an FLW guy. And I learned that technique like 4 years ago or something. Like, we went fishing and he went out, he's casting this frog under this dock. It was like in the middle of summer. He was just like, tick, 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 tick. And that frog was just, you know, back and forth. And I was like, holy crap. And he was hammering them, you know? And so I was, and actually even before him, and I didn't put the two together until I fished with Kyle, but I fished with a guy that used to fish the FLW named McCoy Borgia. And we were actually down on the Pigeon River waiting for smallmouth one day. I was down there and we hooked up, and he was fishing a popper in a creek that was up to our chest, basically, the little Pigeon River. And we're like in this hole and it's up to his chest, and he's sitting here walking this little popper, like just with the tip of his rod, just with the his wrist. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And it didn't really register like I should go do that until I fished with Kyle. And I was like, oh man, that's the same technique. It's just with a different bait. And it's like, oh yeah, I can do that with my jerk baits too. Like, now KVD swings that thing like it's like a I don't even know what. Like he's just like, because he like really works that. I don't think you got to work it that hard. Well, he's working it in the summertime too. I'm usually just throwing jerk baits in the winter. So you don't want to be you don't want to be like pulling that thing, 5 feet right and 5 feet left because the fish aren't going to follow it. I'm moving that jerk bait just a foot at a time back and forth like I would a frog or like I would a spook.
Okay. Say, I've probably been doing too big of pops with.
Yeah.
Then
subtle's always better, I feel like. in a lot of situations anyway. There's times and places to go aggressive, I'm sure, but
no, I only got one more question regarding jerk baits.
All right.
And that's color. Now you ain't got to go into detail like certain color names, but like as far as like brighter colors, darker colors, flake,
depends what you want to fish for, right? And so it depends on the water quality and clarity. So like if I'm fishing Lake Erie, I'm fishing like a very minnowy brown with like a clear, like a translucent body. You know what I'm saying? Like you can see through the bait, you can see the BBs inside of it and all that crap. And so that's what I'm fishing on, like a Lake Erie or even like a Lake St. Clair or some of these upground reservoirs. Like that's what I'm fishing. So something that goes deep and something that is kind of brown, green, that looks like a minnow. And it's perfectly clear outside of just like the back of it. So, and I don't even know the color, what they're called. But if I'm fishing water that's like a little bit stained, a little bit like, it's still clear. Like, so the river I was fishing the other day, the water's like clear relatively to that river, but still you only got like a foot and a half of visibility. I'm fishing something that's opaque. You know what I mean? Something that's you can't see through by opaque. You can't see through it. And I wanted to catch smallmouth. So anything that's got blue and chartreuse and like a little bit of like gray in it, kind of looks like a minnow. I forget what it's called. I think it's like the Jackal Re-Range, and I think it was called not Helsinki Shags. I think that's what Rapala's version of that's called. It's just like a chartreuse line across it, and then there's like a nice like blue back. It's not sexy shad, but it's got like it's actual chartreuse, and it's got like a blue back, and then it's got some silver in it, and it looks like a minnow just with some chartreuse on it, pretty much. And those smallmouth just go crazy over blue and chartreuse. I don't know why, but those are smallmouth colors. And so those typically work really well. But you want to do something that's typically pretty natural this time of year because the water's clear. You want something that looks like a fish. And I don't know. I guess I just feel like that's the way I go with it. Now, if I'm fishing a crankbait or something, and I don't fish a ton of crankbaits. It's actually one of my goals this year to fish more crankbaits. But I like gold a lot around me because it just reflects so well in dirty water. Like my spinner baits are gold. Like everything I fish is gold or has gold in it around here. And typically that works really, really well. Like gold flake for my soft plastics, gold, just lipless crankbaits and just all kinds of stuff. So,
well, I've heard gold's a really good color in winter, anyways.
Yeah, and now I guess in the winter I don't use it as much because I don't need to because the water is more clear. So the reason I use gold is because I think it reflects better in muddy water. That's why I use gold. So the water's not as muddy in the winter. Now in the spring, like I'm gonna have I wish I had it. Actually, I do have it with me. Got next to me. So I like these are my spinner baits that I throw. Like there's pure gold, man. Just gold Colorado blades, gold skirt, muddy water. It works really good.
I'm gonna have to try that because all I got is silver, and I've never caught a fish on a spinner bait.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I love so. Man, that's a whole nother. I love spinner baits in this. I can go through all my seasons. We're
gonna have to bring you back on here sometime.
But
it's talk about spinner bait.
Definitely love spinner baits, and that's something where a lot of guys have gone toward chatter baits. But I still throw my spinner bait, man.
Well, let me ask you about this. I just picked something up at Academy. Like I said, I've never caught a fish on a spinner bait, and this is basically what it is, just with a twist. It's a live target bait ball spinner rig. It's basically a spinner bait, but it's got extra wires coming off of it, and it looks like a bait ball.
It's like a little Alabama rig.
Yeah, sort of.
Okay.
Sort of like that. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm interested in trying that, especially since
I don't see why it wouldn't work. Yeah. I mean, as long as so it's like anything. I mean, I went out and got all excited about Alabama rigs last year and bought like a couple of them and all that. And you throw an Alabama rig through the water and you're like, this is cheating. Like when you watch it come back, you're like, holy crap. Like that's awesome,
I've seen videos of people bringing in 3 fish at a time on those
crazy. But I would say so that is what you're describing sounds like a little mini Alabama rig, and you're gonna have to.
That's basically what it is.
You gotta like commit to a bait like an Alabama rig because you can slay on them if they're being active, and that's the thing about like an A rig is like it'll show you it's a good bait to show you the activity of the fish. If they're hitting it and how aggressively they're hitting it, you can gauge a lot. If they're not really hitting it, bump down to just a normal spinner bait because that's all a spinner bait is it's like a one-armed Alabama rig. It's like a finesse Alabama rig. And I love spinner baits around like light quarter-ounce spinner baits with like big old blades on them and double skirts and like a buoyant trailer and just like float it. I mean, because they basically like float just around like wood and just like pull it through wood because spinner baits are so weedless and not weedless, but they're snagless around wood and stuff like that. So it works really well.
I just thought of one more question with the jerkbait.
Yeah.
What are you targeting with that? Are you trying to stay around rock or?
I am an open water dude jerkbaiting. So jerkbaits are so expensive. I will only throw them when like I'm pretty confident like there's not a lot of crap in the water. Like I've got to be relatively familiar with the area. Like I'm not throwing a jerkbait. I'm not going to like my random lake that in a tournament that I have no idea there's like a shopping cart down there. Like I don't want to get my jerkbait stuck. Like they're just too pricey to get stuck. So I'm typically like a Lake Erie, like open water situations where like now and again I will touch the bottom. But when I'm jerkbait fishing, I'm not going for fish that are on the bottom. If I was going for fish on the bottom, I'd be throwing a drop shot, or I'd be throwing a jig, or I'd be like, my whole thing was I don't throw a jerkbait at this specific, or I don't throw like a bottom jig this time of year because all the fall foliage or however you say it, like all the leaves and grass and crap and sticks, they just like settle on that bottom. Like that bottom is a mess right now in the rivers and lakes. Those fish aren't going to sit down there and be in that crap. They're going to be suspended up above it. And so that jerkbait meets them right where they are, and I feel like that's the other reason I like throwing it, because right now at this transitional time of year, because we're not quite yet in winter, but we're pretty close. But that river's still setting. Like I caught a lot of leaves on the bottom yesterday when it did hit the bottom, and they weren't like decayed leaves. Like they were leaves that have been there for a few weeks at the most. And that tells me like that bottom is still a mess, and those fish don't want to sit down there on the bottom at this time of the year. In the winter, they will. In the winter, they'll just sit there in the river anyway. But, at this time of year, I don't feel like they're there yet.
All right, sweet. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you feel like we need to?
No. I mean, that's just jerkbait. I mean, jerkbaits are something that, like anything, you're talking spinner baits, talking jerk baits. Like I like fishing a lot of different ways. In Ohio, you got to learn how to fish a lot of different ways because the we don't have a lot of good impoundments like Tennessee does. Like, we've got to figure it out. We don't have great weather a lot of times. So you've got to be versatile, man. Like, you see guys like Kurt Smith's, he lives down in Cincinnati. He's fishing for hybrids at this point in the winter, but like, he's down there fishing lipless crankbaits right now on the Ohio River. While I'm up here fishing jerkbaits, and you got guys up steelhead fishing with crankbaits by Cleveland and any random type of bait. It's just a matter of like putting in time to go and get good at it. And I found myself a lot of times like chasing the latest trends of, everybody gets all hyped up about bait X, Y, or Z, or like a chatterbait or a Tokyo rig or a donkey rig or a whatever. Like, there's just so many rigs out there nowadays, and it's easy to be like, oh man, I gotta go get set up for that. The guys who are like the best and most consistent, I feel like they just kind of do like a few things really, really well, and they know their strengths, and they just go with it, and I've fell victim a lot of times to a lot of the trends and everything. As a result of that, I've learned how to fish a lot of different ways, but then I found that, man, I'm not really proficient at anything. And so like I fall back on just like a few different things, just depending on the time of the year and the body of water I'm fishing. And I'll just hammer that home and just keep doing it and get really good at it. And just apply that to similar bodies of water when I go fish. So that's
cool, man. I think there was a lot of good information here, and I'm psyched to put this stuff to use. Probably try that this weekend.
Yeah, cool.
I appreciate you coming on and everything. You want to give a shout out to the sponsors and social media and all that good stuff?
I'm not worried about my social media at all, but I appreciate the opportunity for you guys bringing me on. Always grateful for, just thankful for being a part of a pretty cool kayak company in Jackson, and just enjoying that. And, this year, St. Croix picked me up. I've fished a lot of different rods. I've fished Loomis rods, and I've fished St. Croix back in the past, and I've jumped around to a couple different places, but very thankful for that company as well, and have been doing some work on media with them as well, and can't wait to see some of that get published out here in the next year. Some projects we've been working on, and so I really love that rod company. And then Bending Branches is always just, Andrew at Bending Branches always treated me really well too. And just very grateful for the opportunities that they extend in an ever-changing world where kayaks seem to be more propelled by pedals and motors than paddles nowadays. But, when I'm out on the river, I'm in thick stuff, it's all about the paddle. And so Bending Branches to me is where it's at. So, but yeah, I mean, and quite honestly, like, thanks to you guys for just being consistent in your content production and providing a platform for people to learn. It's an industry that it's ever changing. You see it changing all the time, and I'm just happy to be a part of it. And sorry that I couldn't be more definite in a lot of my answers today, but I guess my whole theme is, you figure out what works for you. There's, just take something that you might have some mild interest in learning, and then just make it your own. And I think that's the best way that you can go about fishing, and just put time in to get good at whatever that is. So if like you want to get into jerkbaits, then take the time to do it if you're going to invest the money to do it, and get good at it and catch some fish and gain confidence in it, and then branch off to another technique. So I guess one last thing is, the way I learned techniques, I will only bring that lure. It's like, I will only bring like one lure a lot of times.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
And so that's how I learned some techniques like that. So, and that's what I would suggest, and don't put it down until you get confident in it. So,
yeah. And man, as far as what you were saying about, figuring out what works for you, I think you did a really good job at putting down like somewhere for people to start. They can,
sure,
try to mimic you to a certain point and then just tweak it to
Yeah.
what fits them and everything. So I think you put out a lot of good information on there and everything. And I appreciate you coming on.
Right on, man. You're welcome. Yeah, nope. And I'm not the authority on any of this. And so, yeah, so to your point right there, I am not the bottom line authority on it. I'm just, I learn just as much as anybody else about this stuff and try to learn as much. And so hopefully it can help somebody. But I will say go to Tactical Bass. And if you really want to learn about it, go to them. Go just YouTube that. After you listen to this, go YouTube that and you'll learn everything you want about jerkbait fishing. So there you go.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate it. Coming on.
All right.
And,
Ryan, hey, it was good talking to you, man.
Yeah, you too, man. We'll have to get you back on sometime about the spinner baits.
Hey, whenever you want to talk fishing, I'm here.
All right, brother.
All right. Talk to you later, man.
All right. Everybody else, tight lines and smooth paddling.
This is Bucky Buckstabber, founder and executive director of the Fly Fishing Collaborative. At the Fly Fishing Collaborative, also known as FFC, we mobilize the fly fishing community, outdoor enthusiasts, and people of goodwill everywhere to create sustainable solutions to poverty and human trafficking. We have many different initiatives to accomplish this goal, but our primary focus is building organic and environmentally friendly aquaponics farms for communities suffering from trafficking because of a lack of resource. If you're interested in funneling your passion for the outdoors to benefit those that need help the most, then visit flyfishingcollaborative.org.
Josiah Pleasant, Executive Director of Agathos Village here to specifically invite you to positively impact the vulnerable in Juneau, Alaska, in partnership with FFC. Bucky and I have been blessed to be a part of Transformational Impact Abroad and are stoked to bring our lessons learned home to serve the marginalized. If it breaks your heart to know that the vulnerable are literally left out in the cold, don't have community, a home, or healthy food, join us to make a tangible impact by donating or making plans to volunteer with us. You can donate at www.flyfishingcollaborative.org and write Alaska in the notes to help us help others.